Well, look where we are once again. It's Thursday, and here we are lighting the candle, a world that works. We're just three friends getting together to have these conversations on well, we do it on a cycle every Thursday, and then we also have this really neat thing that we've been doing lately with what I like to call the spotlight conversations. And this one is kind of a mix between spotlight and our regular Thursday, because we have two of our regular crew here, Melissa Boucher and Ken Caputo, who happen to also be very dear friends of mine. And to lay the table for the conversation today, we're always talking about the conversation of how do we make life empowering for anyone that's involved in the conversation. And there are some people that I've trained under who basically say everything is a conversation. You don't like the conversation that you're in, it's not going your way, change the conversation. But you have to remember, you have to be in the conversation and let it be exactly the way that it is before you can go a different direction. Now, I don't know if that's true, if there's any proof for it or anything of that nature, but a really great man that I used to know said, in order for you to change the direction of a horse, it's best that you ride it the direction that it's going. So, all of that said, I thought today what we would talk about is, and it doesn't get a lot of conversation in realms where people are not meeting just for this purpose. But let's talk about community development, as a public conversation for what's good for everybody. And I can speak from experience going back to the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, where we used to have get-togethers, and they were all about how can we take our situation now and create new opportunities for everyone in the community. And that is kind of playing against my recent experience of being on LinkedIn specifically to tell you that I was being invited to a LinkedIn meeting that apparently had 5,642 people that had already signed up. And the conversation was, how do we empower anti-racism, as a group? And they really are looking to form an organization that's about another organization that's about anti-racism. So probably top line, anybody have any thoughts about how successful things are if you're against them, or how successful things are if you're for them? Those are the kind of thoughts that I'm having today. Melissa, you are on first. Do you have any response or any thoughts that you're having? And you don't have to talk about the specific nature of what I talked about, but what do you see happening when people are either for or against something?
Yeah. So I think that that's a really good way to put it, because obviously, when you're coming from a negative point of view, it doesn't take on the same power that it does when you take it from a more positive point of view, right? So I believe that 100%. Even growing up, I always felt that way about even like raising my children, or how my parents raised me. It's like when something was really just when somebody was focusing on all the negatives, then it was like it made me not want to do it. So when my father came in my room, he says, "Your room's a mess. Pick it up." And really, my mind right before that, I was thinking, I'm going to clean my room and make my parents so proud. But after he said that, I didn't want to do it. So I think that when you see somebody who does something right, like if he come in and say, "Wow, you did such a great job with your room," or pointed out a few good things, then you want to do more of it. So I think that can be more powerful. At least it always was for me. And I think it worked really well with my children as well. So
Excellent first jumping off point. Ken, how about you?
Just wondering about where the both and is, you know?
What if there is none in either one of those scenarios?
Well, so here's the thing that just kind of, I flashed back to lifeguard training years and years and years ago. I was a lifeguard, and one of the things that they used to always tell us was, if if you need someone to go get help, like to call 911, you're resuscitating someone, if you just yell it out to a group of people, no one will take action.
Right.
You have to point at someone. You have to single them out and say, you go call 911. So, and I wonder with these kind of things, if part of the advocacy isn't, you got to point someone out who's not engaging in the behavior, that's to the benefit of the community, or, and if you just, and it's, this is a little bit circular, but if you're just yelling out, it needs to stop, you're not pointing out anyone to actually advocate to stop and take positive action. At the same time, if you can't call out the actions you want, the behaviors you want to see change from the individuals who are changing it, they're just going to keep doing what they're doing, most likely. So like, is there a way to, or not, is there a way? How do you balance these things where there's, because to me, I agree with you, the emphasis is on education. It's on helping people feel empowered and feel strong enough within themselves that they're not threatened by change, by, all of a sudden you're seeing new demographics come into your community and you embrace that instead of being afraid of what that might mean for you. All those protective instincts kick in, all of your inherited biases kick in. Those don't go away over time. Some of those have been built up over generations. So, so there's got to be space to, to nurture all of those things into a new state. And at the same time, sometimes you got to defend yourself. You got to step up and fight. So how do those things coexist in a balanced and appropriate way? I think that's the question.
There's all of that. And here's the yes and. Why, in your mind, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say probably 85, 90, 98, 99% of people on LinkedIn are business owners or work in a business, and they're there to promote business aspects of their life. Does that sound kind of true?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the percentage, but yeah, I mean, a good portion of those people, that's what they're there for. Yes.
So if we stand on top of most are on LinkedIn to promote their business, the question immediately comes to me, what's in it for somebody to publicly be for something that is anti anything? So first of all, there's this premise in mathematics that then gives you the premise in conversation. Are you familiar with the old theorem that you cannot prove a negative?
Mm-hmm.
There is no proof in mathematics or in conversation that a negative is so. So if I say to you, Ken, when did you stop beating your dog? I want to give you, ample room, to disprove and tell me all of the factual data that you've never beaten a dog in your entire life. I wish you good luck with that. Okay? It's easy to make that outright accusation, but it's impossible to prove that it never happened and doesn't indeed happen on a regular basis. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is any name that you're being called or any misstatement of fact that in truth has never occurred, since it's never occurred, there is no smoking gun for that it never occurred. So you would have to have 100% coverage of every activity you've ever done. And this is one of the main reasons why people are so empowered to point to defects in people's speeches and or behaviors going back 25, 30, 40 years ago, as if that now says who that person is. So I was bold and I posted, on that invite, something to the effect of, don't we ever learn that being against something is the surest way to make sure that the conversation persists through time? You've now built an organization who is their total reason for being is to make something conversational go away. You have to have a definition of racism in order to have anti-racism, correct? That definition may not be equally shared among all parties that are either in the accusing group or the accused group. There may be lots of room for misunderstanding what is a particularly heinous example of racism that is demonstrable and provable, and someone who just happens to bear visual characteristics to someone else that the group is now saying they're all the same way.
So is it kind of like saying you're only better than, I mean, I'd like to think that we are all better than our worst day or our worst moment, right?
I like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, like everybody, you know, I can't think of a thing that I haven't made a mistake in at some point in time. I mean, like we all, that's normal, right? Even as children, we make mistakes. That's how we learn. But we can't just you know, label somebody based upon one act or even two. You know, I mean, you can't just label someone. I think that's what you're trying to say. So,
well, see, here's the thing. In most of these instances today, in 2021, 90% of society, I believe, is willing to forgive and forget mistakes.
mm,
There's 5% of what I like to call the screamers that while they're busy calling someone other than you and me that bad word, we sure as hell don't want to be included in that group by standing up to them. And in the post that I put up, I said, do we never learn? Let's just examine some of the facts here. So the easiest way to say that you'll get over time billions of dollars from the federal government is to show them that this is a systemic problem, such as, how about illiteracy, right? How about, so the war on poverty, the war on drugs. Think of all of these government initiatives that were created through Congress so that such and so behavior will never, ever, ever happen again. When you hear those words, you need to run, okay? Anything that gets made into law is automatically at some point, year in and year out, either going to get funded or not funded, but it's a law on the books right now that they can do either. So my consideration here was 5,000 people. I'm interested. What would have them believe that belonging to an organization that they're certainly going to have very little voice in? I don't know many conversations where 5,000 people have an equal voice, right? I'm going out on a limb here.
mm.
I'm going to say they don't. So now prove to me that they do. So the whole idea here is what would be in it for people? And I've talked to a few and I've said, look, what do you think about this issue? What do you think about that issue? Where so many people are getting, you know, the cancel culture, the Me Too, all the rest of these sort of things that don't always seem to be, well, let's just say the appetite for revenge isn't as strong in some cases as in others. Usually has something to do with a party line or whatever it is. So the point is this: when you consider having a vocal voice saying we're looking for 10,000 members for this so that we can get funding for it and we're taking donations at this website, I'm suspicious. What are they really trying to accomplish, do you think? And you may not have any idea at all, but if they were saying we are out to teach our community love in all situations, this is not about inclusion. This is about developing curiosity as to how people in our lives experience it the same or different than we do. That'd be a huge difference in conversation, wouldn't it be? I'll donate to that one. As you said, Ken, education, let's give people these really cool opportunities to experience something in a group where people feel safe to stand up and say what they really think, as opposed to being one of the 5,000 that's going along to get along. That's my opinion.
I'm thinking about this. Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. You asked like why people do it. I think that, no matter, even if there are people on totally different ends of the spectrum, I think that most of the time people are doing this or doing whatever that they're doing out of, in their, whatever it is in their mind is a positive or right thing to do.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I'm just trying to I mean, if you asked me, like, do I think that most people, if we take a more positive tact, if that is more powerful, I think I absolutely agree. And I think that's a really, really good point. But, even if we said something like you are better than even your worst day or moment, the truth is sometimes people have bad moments and they need to be addressed, right? So, I mean, what do you do in that particular moment? Like a man's mad at his wife and then takes out a knife and stabs her. Obviously, it needs to be addressed, even if that was in a moment of passion and he felt horrible about it and didn't mean to do it, and or whatever, whatever that reason is. It's just like, but that still needs to be addressed. So, how do you do that? I guess,
It's very interesting. Have you noticed how people will sign up for things that they have no background in or no understanding? Just
Sure.
they think it's the thing to do, right? Very few people would take the Ken Caputo approach, which would be, I've got questions about this,
Mm-hmm.
And what sort of questions would you have about a group that basically says they are anti-racism?
From a business perspective, is it really a marketing thing? I mean, like, if you think about it this way, people don't pay for like having their optimal body composition. They pay for weight loss, or they pay for the pain, like to make the pain go away. That's what they respond to. So, responding to loving kindness will appeal to a certain group, but then there's another group that are going to respond to doing battle against a perceived wrong, So, and I know from a business perspective, it's always been frustrating to me that as a small business owner, my marketing has to reflect what people will actually engage with. And then from there, I have to, guide the message to what I actually want them to learn and understand. So, so like I'd go into schools and they wanted years ago, they wanted a bully prevention program. And they didn't need a bully prevention program. What they needed was a more positive, safe school climate where the necessity for bullying wasn't there. But it was hard for them to get from stopping the bullying, the crisis that they were seeing in their school, kids picking on each other, kids getting hurt, attendance dropping, grades dropping, depression. All these things are happening. And yes, they're symptomatic and they need to deal with it freaking now. So if they were going to get funding, if they were going to get buy-in from parents and from the kids, they had to message it as an anti-bullying campaign. And that was the only way that they were going to be able to, even though that wasn't the best way, that was the only way at that time. And the interesting thing was 5 years later, going back into the same schools, and they're all talking about positive school climate and social emotional learning. So the conversation shifted over time, gently and slowly, as perceptions changed from, I'm in crisis and this just needs to stop, to, okay, what's behind this? What's actually systemic? These things don't just happen in a vacuum. I mean, for some reason, people believe that there is racism and there's a need to combat it. So that's not like a myth. It doesn't not exist. It absolutely exists. We've seen the proof. We've seen it manifest in different ways. So is this just the best way for them to basically get their message out in a way where people will listen, and then can you make, so now it's up to the organization. Who does the organization want to be? And I think a lot of times what you see is the same thing, again, sticking with business. Business starts, they have an idea, they have a thought. What they don't have are clearly defined values that become the bedrock of the decisions that they make as environmental things influence that business over time. And Jim Collins talks about this in all of his work. He says the greatest companies have values that are immutable. They are part of the foundation. Johnson & Johnson literally wrote them in stone, you know, and although tactics changed, goals changed, missions changed, people changed, those essential values did not. So if you have an organization that didn't start there, they're going to be influenced by, you know, things that come and go, you know, the weather systems that come and go. So I don't know if that helps, but.
Well, no, you know what? You're always leading us to a different part of the church. Now it's a question whether, you know, the pew that we're sitting in today is a better vantage point to see things than where we were before. And I think it is, because as I, you know, start to tell you a little bit more about this post, one of the neat ways that you get people to say, yeah, I'm for that, is that we're out to, you know, this is the person who's saying this anti-racism movement will force businesses to be more diversified in their hiring and promotion practices and favor people of one particular group over another until we have equity, okay? And this is really kind of an interesting thing. And what I find is that most of the folks that I talk to really think that it's very important for us to solve old ills by making sure that people today have the outcome that is equal to anybody else that's tried what they've done, without regard to how hard did they work at it, how good are they at their job, you know, how easily are they replaced in the organization, those sort of things. And if you
I think that equity needs to come, you know, or I guess the approach of it in opportunity, not in necessarily the end result, if that makes any sense. So everybody should have equal opportunity.
see,
correct?
yeah, and that's built into our Constitution, but it doesn't guarantee outcomes. And there's a class of people right now that doesn't care what the Constitution says. They're more interested in how can they make sure people that look like them, that are their constituents, are getting the lifestyle that they say are not there, that they don't have the equity for. What happens after the work, how you get, you know, the house on the beach, you have the kids going to Harvard, all those things has nothing to do with anything other than how they look, or maybe what their DNA says. So this is a pretty interesting deal. We had, during the time that I was growing up, you know, the whole Bill of Rights deal, and you know, they want to do away with the Constitution. This is a real thing, okay? Folks at home, you can go check this, and there are people out there. The platform of several major groups that are household words now that weren't necessarily so 3, 4, 5 years ago are based on changing the family unit. They're based on changing. You know, the Constitution. They want to change the Constitution unconstitutionally. We don't need to have all of that high bar for 2/3 of, you know, the Congress and X number of states to ratify this change. We're just going to change it. Stroke of a pen and a telephone. So that comes all the way back to, if you get people conditioned over time to this is normal, it doesn't sound so crazy to them. No, this is kind of like a lot of things that we were told when we were in school, that because somebody's different, we should make sure that we include them first. Now that's well-intentioned, right? But how are you going to know if somebody's different or not? What's your basis for making a determination whether somebody gets included or whether they're not in the cool kids clique, or whether they actually get bullied? Mostly going to be visual.
Right.
You know, I mean, I'll go back to when I was in grammar school. It was pretty clear, the short bus. Y'all remember that? I don't know if they're still doing that any longer. These were kids that were being integrated into what they called regular school, who had some sort of learning impairment or disability, or were slow.
Yeah.
The short bus went door to door to pick these kids up. They ended up being, assistant janitors and in the AV club and whatever it was. But the point was, there wasn't any intention of having them be in the top grades. There was nothing that was built there to empower their learning to the point where they could overcome the testing shortfalls that they had had. And the truth is, if you stop and you go back through history, there's dozens of people, but the two that come to mind are Albert Einstein and Thomas Alva Edison. Those two guys never would have been anything, never would have gone to, or accomplished what they did based on what their first and second grade teachers had to say about them. So where we are right now is, it's kind of an interesting thing where talk is king. People say outrageous things. Other people say, well, that sounds generally right, and they're doing this publicly, and they're doing it in a lot of different publications. Where's the opportunity to actually have a dialogue about it? Is there one? I wonder.
I definitely see a lot of people it's like people are offended, and then people are offended that other people are offended. It just gets like out of control. And the outrage, it's like we just create such outrage, right? So there's like, I think about like the Dr. Seuss book situation, right? So that comes to be, right? And there's such outrage over the fact that they want to eliminate this particular book from children reading. But I actually equally think it's just as outrageous how many people were outraged over it. I'm sitting there going, it's a Dr. Seuss book. Things change. Like, we don't write books about like horses, how to drive a horse cart, or, there's certain things that have changed in our lifetimes that we just don't teach anymore. Like, we don't teach about, I don't know, about women in a certain way because, now we can vote, and now we can, we don't. So it's just so funny that everybody just gets outraged, and the whole thing is just so, it's like, why are we even mad in the first place? Don't we have better things to do and more important things to talk about? I just don't even want to have the conversation about stuff like that, because I just think the whole thing is silly no matter how you're looking at it. It's just like, can we talk about something else? I mean, I don't think my child is going to be worse off without seeing it either. So, I just don't understand the outrage.
So that's really cool. Ken, are you up to speed on the Dr. Seuss issue?
Yeah, and actually the fascinating thing about that is, if you were to, there's multiple things to that, and I think it really just comes back to confirmation bias. If you're afraid of things being canceled or taking away from you or censored, you're going to view that situation through that lens,
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're thinking more from things changing and having a new insight into how to promote racial equality and that kind of stuff, you're going to see it through another lens. I mean, the reality of it was the family. It was not the government. No one burned the books. The family
Right.
decided they wanted to pull this, and they said that Dr. Seuss would have agreed.
Hang on. That's why I'm asking you if you're up to speed on the whole story.
Oh, okay. Is there more to
This
it?
is the punch after the punch, okay? The initial punch was, there was a school district in Virginia, that annual, Reading Across America?
Mhm.
Okay, you can verify this, ladies and gentlemen at home. I'm not making this up. There was a school district that very innocuously decided, for their own reasons, that they were removing titles that have always been on that reading list for Reading Across America, okay? Now, funny enough, if you go back and you research, why is Reading Across America a thing? It was to honor Dr. Seuss. It's around his birthday, and the whole idea is he's done so much for children's, preschool education and just giving people so much enjoyment, reading children's books to their children through generations. That's why they created this Reading Across America. So now that gets picked up. It could have been as innocuous as anything, except for it gets picked up on Twitter. Then when this happened in February, it gets picked up on Twitter, it gets picked up a half a dozen other places, and you can go online and you can see the images that they found disrespectful. One of them is a Chinaman with a rice paddy hat, running along, doing whatever he's doing. And there's like 6 different books that each one have one image that they were taking issue with. Turns out they said we weren't really even taking issue with that. They've just all been on the list for so many times. It's almost like, who cares on those books? Okay. So that turns into this big deal. And then Fox News comes on and they have a story that basically says Seuss is being banned. And then, of course, not everybody comes back and says, and this was all happening before March 2nd or 3rd, I want to say, if you look at it. And then, yes, the foundation, and they come out with and also we had Joe Biden do his little reading, for Reading Across America. Not once did he mention Dr. Seuss. Not once did he mention any of the titles of the 35 other books, or however many that is. And by leaving Dr. Seuss out of his public statement, that added complete mass to, yes, Dr. Seuss has been banned. So now the family and the foundation come out and say, we don't want this kind of publicity. This is horrible. Tell everybody that we're going to stop publishing these books, and we will. However, you don't even want to count how many millions of copies are still out there in libraries, all the rest of that stuff. Nobody's taken it off the shelf that I've heard. So in response, Melissa, I did some extensive research because somebody said, what I posted a meme that said, when we have people that are breaking the law on a regular basis and all we can point to is what a bad thing Dr. Seuss is, we may have some serious problems here in this country. And then there's the counter post to that, a comment that basically says, that wasn't anybody canceling anything. That was the family taking it off, and saying, we're not going to sell this any longer because it's upsetting people. No, one thing happened first, the next thing happened, and then before you know it, by accident, this gets picked up the wrong way and becomes a national thing. But I don't know that anybody other than that one school district, for whatever reason that they had when they published their list, just didn't seem to have any Dr. Seuss books on it. And that's their story, and they're sticking with it. There was no intent to diss him or diss any of the family or the foundation. But see what happens when people start reading and believing what they see, especially if it gets picked up on Twitter.
That happens all the time. And I, and the interesting thing that I observe as we, especially like, we were talking about this morning, Bill, that I have people on all ends of the fence, politically, and there are people in there that are polar opposites. And I always say, I'm like, I love you all, like, right. And so, but it's so interesting to me because I find that people are so outraged on either side. They're so upset, and they have this idea of demonizing the other side. And I'm sitting there going, nobody's like really a really bad demon. I mean, I'm not saying that, everything that we do or whatever is necessarily the right thing or the wrong thing or whatever. I'm just saying that we don't focus on what the problem is and then try to resolve it. To me, it's like, why do we have to invest all these emotions? Instead, we should just look at what the issue is and then try to find ways to resolve that issue. Like this, even if you brought in the word racism and you looked at, the Black people in the police, it's not about it. To me, it's just like, whether you agree there's a problem or don't agree there's a problem. The fact of the matter is that they don't trust each other. So let's try to find a way to resolve that instead of sitting there trying to figure out, like, I don't know, demonizing the other, because no one's going to move if you just make the other person evil. Now you got to take sides. And I'm sitting there going, why can't we all be on the same side? Just, that's the way I feel about it. I just,
so you can do a quick search, and if you just Google Dr. Seuss is racist, you'll get to see dozens of articles that got picked up in also rans. Nobody did any research into the subject. Nobody went back and was interested in telling the truth. Just one newspaper in Virginia. Whoa, time out, guys. We called the source, and here's what they had to say about it. Boy, did we open a hornet's nest that we didn't intend to. And Ken, if I owe you an apology for jumping on your story, it's just I spent hours looking into this. I can't even begin to tell you, with the internet the way that it is right now, how long it took for me to dope out the true story. So if y'all were using that to show that something gets said by somebody, the next thing you know, it's called racist. The next thing you know, it goes nuclear. Okay. It trends on Twitter, as whatever that thing that they call something going viral. It's not necessarily good news. So Ken, you want to do a counterpoint now, or you want to start off in the next half hour? Because we're just about to the top of the half hour here.
It'd be pretty brief, because actually that aligns pretty much with, the things that I heard as well. And what's interesting is, listening to you tell the story through your view, through your experiences, your perceptions. Whereas me, I looked at it through the lens of being a writer and thinking, if I wrote something as a teenager, being a selfish jerk when the world was different back then, and it didn't align with, trying to make the world a little better, bringing some enlightenment to the world, I would want it pulled off the shelves personally.
Yes.
And that was the thing that I read from the foundation, was Dr. Seuss would have wanted those books pulled if they weren't doing what they were designed to do. And through today's lens, yeah, maybe he was a racist back then, because that he was operating under a different set of social norms. So, because we're all evolving, and I don't care who you are, if you were able to look at us as teenagers and there was TikTok and Facebook and everything, and you Googled, Bill Carell was a selfish jerk, you could find confirmation that that was true, right? I know it would be that way for me, so,
you could never find anything that proved that it wasn't true.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So, but at the same time, it's you're right. And the outrage, I think, again, just comes back to people are looking for things that confirm their fears. And, and then when they get pushback, they just get angrier. And, so they grab onto this. And the reality of it is, if I go on Amazon right now, there's 100 Dr. Seuss books that are readily available, being used in schools. And frankly, the ones that were pulled out of circulation, I never read any of them.
Okay, be careful with that. No books were taken off of any shelf. They committed to not print anymore that they haven't printed in over 12 years.
So, and even if they aggressively pulled them off shelves,
Correct.
They're all books, number one, that I hadn't read. That happens every year. Things, because people aren't interested in them anymore.
Exactly.
They stop reading them. So I get the fear, and I get how it becomes a rallying cry for advocating a certain perspective, and you're right. The reality of it is, in the end, I think it's just one more, it's interesting. Like, I'm kind of not on Facebook right now because it's just not, it's unhealthy from the perspective of no one's having dialogue in that format. They're yelling and pointing to things that prove their point. So, and if it shifts back, that's great. But in the meantime, having one-on-one conversations with lots of people who do not think that way, and they're willing to have this kind of a healthy dialogue. Hear different perspectives, and then learn from it. So, so maybe that's the thing, is remembering that there's a lot of people who, in a moment, they have a reaction and they have an outburst. And when you can post it on Twitter or whatever, now that stays out there. And you might change your mind or forgotten you even said it a day later, but then everybody's accumulating these things and it leads to that outrage that Melissa was talking about. So.
All right. So we're going to call it there because I think we're actually at about 42 minutes, which I love. This is the stopwatch doesn't really matter on this show. We got great ideas and things to share. Let's talk a little bit about how this public perception gets changed and fed. How much of it's on purpose and how much of it is holy mackerel, look what I found. Okay. That work for you guys on the flip flop?
That works.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody. We're lighting the candle, and no kidding, we're really interested in a world that works. We'll see you in a few.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.